guys, DMO73 here, bringing you another feature match for the week. I am playing a very interesting green, black, red Servants of Reflect OTK list. This was a list that was designed by Ken Tober and the people over at voidandmoon.com with some changes for post errata with Reflect. And Paul is playing a green, black, white Rezzard kind of like reanimator kind of. So pretty fun list. So let's see how it goes. So the whole idea of the Servant OTK is to get a lot of counters and then do a pretty nifty combo with Servant of Reflect and Pumpkin Witch. To be able to just kill your opponent all in one turn. So Paul's going to be going first. So right off the bat, he's getting that Black Silence and going into a Elvish Priest and playing a Levitate. So I get my orb off the top so that I can luckily have more Regalia out there to not miss my Ruler's Memoria. I go ahead and filter with Reflect, and I put back the Feasting to the bottom, and then I'm very excited because I had that Scorn. I topped it into the Scorn. Unfortunately, that just punished myself because I just made him discard a Behemoth, and he has Book of Ibon in his hand. So I have essentially just fueled his turn 2, which is not very good for me, because now he's going to be able to play that Book of Ibon right off the top, and suddenly on turn 2 he's got a 1500. So not good for me. So I'm in a position right now where I have to decide whether or not to take a hit and go for a stone, or I can flip over to Reflect and be able to bounce the Behemoth back, but I waste a turn in terms of being essentially at that point 3 will behind. Not a very good position for me to be in at all. The more I'm thinking about it here, taking one hit from a Behemoth, it would not be awful, because I know, I have 4,000 life and it's only 1,500, so it's like, I think I can survive it. So I go ahead and decide to take the hit, and I play my my Familiar of Refrain. So the reason why I play this is my personal addition to the list, is this essentially is my way to make up for not having, having the errata. So it has Servant of Refrain for every copy of it. Every time a counter would go onto your J Ruler, you just give it that many counters plus 1. So now I'm essentially getting counters at double the speed. So the Stoning to Death comes out from Paul. In response, I tap my orb so I can get an extra counter before Familiar dies. I knew he had the Stoning, so I wanted to go ahead and kind of bait it out with the Servant. And this puts me in a position of already having 6 counters moving into my turn 3, which is the same number of counters that I would have if I was playing pre-errata. So just like that, I've kind of mitigated the change to Reflect by doing that. So I take the 1,500 from Behemoth and then move into my turn. Actually draw it into a second Familiar. So I'm deciding whether or not I want to filter before or play the Familiar to be able to maximize my plays. I play Familiar. Filter with Reflect, and at that point I flip over. I remember to put one on back on the bottom. Apparently did not. Oh. No, I do catch it. Okay, good. Good for me. For not forgetting things. I think I put the scorn at the bottom because I really don't necessarily need to be making him discard stuff, because Behemoth's already out on board, so I don't really want to deal with that again. What I could have done is saved the scorn and then forced him to discard it again, but I don't want to fuel a Book of Ibon again. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce the Behemoth, get that off the board, get that back in his hand, keeps me safe. Paul could just immediately replay it, but that would waste essentially his whole turn, and gives me another turn to just kind of goof around. So you see he's got Stoning to Death and Soul Hunt in his hand. He's being attacked by my dog. This is a situation where Soul Hunt would be kind of beneficial for himself, because he'd be able to get his own Behemoth in grave and follow it up by having Stoning to Death in his hand, and he'd be able to get my Familiar off board, but I would still be able to get 2 more counters onto Reflect with my Change the World. I'll flip over back to Reflect at the end of his turn. He's going to try and Stoning to Death. I'm going to respond to the Stoning to Death by tapping and getting 2 counters onto my Reflect. So at this point, I'm feeling a little more secure, so I'm going to go ahead and take the time to get some more stones. I'm going to use Hera to pop the Death Scythe and draw into a card, getting into my second orb, which is awesome for me. I'm going to filter with Reflect. As again, the Scorn of Dark Alices are no longer important enough for me to be able to really want to play them. And so out comes that Servant of Reflect. So the Servant of Reflect, his ability is for every counter on your J roller, or for every 2 counters on your J roller, he gains plus 100/+100. So at this point, because I have 9, he's getting an extra 400 attack, so he is a 6/6. And then the other cool thing about Servant is you can remove a counter from your J roller to bounce him back to your hand at instant speed. So you see there's looks like a Necromancy. Oh, double Behemoth. So Paul has double Behemoth at this point. So again, a Soul Hunt wouldn't be terrible for him, because he'd be able to get one of his Behemoths to the grave. So he's going to float Green Will and then play Soul Hunt. So now even he's going to lose his Elvish Priest, but he's already floated the Green Will from it. And then he's going to use the Green Will plus the rest of his stuff to play that Behemoth. So now we're both sitting at no hands. I have Servant to his Behemoth. I feel pretty comfortable in this position just because of the fact that I have the ability to draw cards if needed, search for cards if needed, bounce that Behemoth back to his hand if needed. So I feel a little secure, but still staring down a 15/15 that I can't block or take damage anyway is nothing to be happy about. I'm going to filter with Reflect to go up to 12 counters. Getting my 3rd Change the World. And I'm going to flip over into Refrain. So at this point I feel really, really secure. Sitting on 3 orbs, 12 counters. This gives me essentially 4 activations from Reflect if I need to, but Paul is only using, Paul's going to be top decking anyway, so I really only need to worry about 2 at this point. So out comes the Death Scythe. Paul decides to call for another stone. Paul decides to go ahead and pass the turn, and so I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that and search with my Reflect and flip her back over. I believe I grab a Dark Faria here. Yep, Dark Faria is the good option here because I can turn off, or in a sense, by flipping over. I grab Feasting to help myself ramp without having to worry about moving out of Refrain. So 4 will is generally where the deck wants to curve out because you can play things like Dark Faria and stuff. And so in this instance, I grab the Feasting so that I can be at that 4 will and have a way to draw cards. So during my upkeep, I use Feasting and Orb's effect to draw a card, and then I use the other orbs to get those counters that I used for Orb right back. So now I'm sitting at 2 cards in hand, 2 cards on field, and I'm feeling pretty comfortable there. And thankfully, I drew into the thing that makes it so that any kind of graveyard stuff that Paul tries to do at this point, I can mitigate with Horn. So this point I'm sitting at 4 will, feeling really comfortable here. I go ahead and I decide to flip back over. You see a little jump cut there. We had to take care of something real quick and then come back to the game. So that's why there's that little jump cut. But I follow up my flipping over to Reflect flipping over to Refrain by playing Heron, popping the Death Scythe again. So I actually draw into a Dark Faria, which I feel sets me up really nicely, because now I have 3 orbs, lots of answers, lots of regalia, will production to be able to do things, be able to bounce, all that stuff, and I can follow up next turn with pure destruction. So Paul pings himself for 200 damage at the end of my turn to mill 6 cards to his grave for Rezzard. He's going to remove the 2 Niflheims and the Levitine from his graveyard to give himself Death Scythe back. He flips Rezzard. So here's an interesting point. If I wanted to, in response to his effect, I could have searched for a Flames of Outer World and then killed Rezzard. Because it does create a chase, so I could search for flames, pay 200, or search for flames, double produce, and do flames. I go ahead and I'm feeling comfortable enough right now that I would kind of rather use the search on something else. Rezzard really isn't a threat to me right now, especially since I know that I'm getting very, very close to being able to do the OTK. And I can respond with blocks and stuff without really feeling too uncomfortable. So this is mainly so that I could, not necessarily like to close out the match and show you guys from an entertainment point, but I just wanted to explain that, like, if I wanted to, something you could definitely do competitively here is to respond to Rezzard's effects by searching for a Flames of Outer World and just killing Rezzard, because he wouldn't get the buffs from the 2 cards going to the grave standby zone yet, and so he only would be a 5/5, and since I have Death Scythe, he loses his Imperishable, and so he would just die. just like that. So I go ahead and flip back over without searching, and then I draw into turn. Actually draw into a Pumpkin Witch, I think, there. So I'm trying to do some math in my head here about whether or not this is the turn to go off for the one turn kill. So you have Pumpkin Witch and Dark Faria. I tap for a stone because I need the extra will at this point, even if I am going to go for the one turn kill. And again, I'm feeling very, very secure with what I have available. There's no Niflheims on board, so I can react to any kind of reanimator stuff or the God's Art any way, shape, or form. So this is me doing math, so I'm not actually attacking. And so I realized that I'm just a little bit short of being able to do completely lethal if I was to do the one turn kill. So I go ahead and decide to take another turn, and with my turn now, I use the Dark Faria with her Awakening cost to destroy Behemoth. So now I'm staring down Paul with an empty hand, no real access to his graveyard because of Flute, and just a Rezzard that can't do his God's Art. And I'm perfectly comfortable just taking the damage from Rezzard to be able to follow up next turn and finish things off. So Paul draws in a turn. He's going to go ahead and tap his Regalia to buff up and pump up his damage from his Rezzard. So now Rezzard is technically a 11/11, dealing 1300 damage. So Paul's got to have a lot of deliberation to do. It looks like he drew into a Genesis creation, but he knows he's staring down the Flute. Unfortunately, he doesn't have enough will to be able to do God's Art and Genesis creation. He could if he tapped for another stone and then tapped his Death Scythe again, because it would reduce the overall cost of his God's Art, because it's right now it's being 5, so it'll be 4. Oh no, he doesn't even have enough to do both, even if he tapped for a stone. If he had a Book of Genesis, he could do a combination of flipping and of trying to play Book of Ibon, as well as doing the God's Art, which would be pretty dangerous for me, because then I'd just be taking damage to the face and I'd pretty much lose my entire setup here. But where I am, knowing that I have, so Paul's doing a lot of deliberating in terms of what he wants to try to do. I have the horn, so I have options to stop him where he is going. I personally know that I have Pumpkin Witch in hand, so I know that next turn I'm going to be able to do the full amount of damage needed to kill him. But there's a lot of options that Paul has to kind of mill over in his head, and so there's a lot of deliberation that's needed. This is one of those situations where if I was playing in I don't know what my opponent has, so this is one of those situations where, like, playing casually with a friend, you would think of just saying like, well, I've got the Pumpkin Witch, like revealing it and just saying like, we can move on to the next game. But that would just be playing, like if I was playing casually with friends. But I wanted to see because I don't know what Paul's card in his hand is, so maybe it's like a Stoning to Death or something like that. So, with no way to cancel the spell, he still has some options, so I'm going to go ahead and let him deliberate and see what goes on. So if you were playing in a tournament, one thing to note, this is actually really interesting good thing to talk about. So if you were playing in a tournament and you were in the situation that I was in, so he go ahead and pays 2 to put a card base down. So now Rezzard's a 13/13, dealing 1500 damage. If you were in the position I was in the tournament, staring down the boards that you were in, and your opponent waited, really that long, or maybe even an extra minute or two past what Paul was deliberating, that would be a position where you might want to call slow play, at least not necessarily to give your opponent a warning, but to call a judge over to have them watch your match, to try to get your opponent to play a little faster, because really, he only had one card in hand and one card on board, and it only had so many options, so it doesn't take terribly too long to think of how to advance the game state when you have, only 2 cards that you can interact with. And for the sake of time in a tournament, especially if you're playing a 50-minute tournament and you're, wanting to get things moving, you, every minute counts, so. So Paul has no cards in hand and he just has Rezzard, so I know he has no way to react to me. So I'm going to go ahead and, after pumping up Dark Faria, I'm going to play Pumpkin Witch. So what happens here is I deal 1000 damage from Servant, and then 500 damage from Feasting, 500 damage from Hera, 700 damage from Dark Faria, which I pumped up, giving me an extra 700 life, 300 damage from Pumpkin Witch, and then here's where the OTK happens. I remove 1 counter from Servant to bounce, or from Reflect to bounce Servant back to my hand, pay a green and replay Servant, who gets the swiftness and flying that Pumpkin Witch gives to my field for the turn, because Pumpkin Witch creates a cloud effect. So I just replay Servant and swing in and deal the damage, and I could even do that one more time, because I had the extra green well up. So that's actually how the OTK works. It's just bouncing your Servant back to your hand and then replaying it while it's got the Pumpkin Witch field effect. So moving into game 2. See that Scorn in my hands. Decide to actually keep the whole thing. Oh, let's post me mulliganing, I think. So I don't have a Regalia, so I'm kind of in the whim of my deck at this point. Because I hope I don't get a Ruler's Memoria. Paul starts off with a Prowler of Niflheim to get a couple cards in his grave. Actually hits a Necromancy. So I draw into turn, still don't hit a Regalia, so I filter to try to hit a Regalia. And I get lucky and hit a Black Silence off the top. So I go ahead and play Scorn, even though it could probably really punish me again. And I actually hit his only other Resonator, which was Niflheim, another Prowler. So at this point I know that Paul has Soul Hunt, Niflheim, and Stoning to Death. That's one of the great things about Scorn, is that even if it misses everything, it informs your next few turns, because you know what your opponent has. So look, at this point I know every single card that Paul has in his hand except for the one that he just drew. So there's the Niflheim, I take the 500 damage, and I'm okay with that. He actually just goes ahead and passes at that point. So I draw into not another Regalia, and then I filter and still don't hit a Regalia, and get lucky enough to hit a another Black Silence. At this point, I'm willing to take the risk to put him down to just 1 card, and now that I know that card is Stoning, so I use that Spiral of Despair while I have the chance. So I know he's got Stoning to Death and 1 other card. He swings at me again for 500, I'm willing to take that damage, and then he passes that turn. Filter again, still hoping to try to get a Regalia, because a single Ruler's Memoria sets me back pretty hard if I don't have one. Still don't get it, but my deck loves me and gives me another black silence. So I have that feasting in my hand, so that's what I'm going to use to be able to get to my other colors, at least at that point. I know he's got stoning to death, but even in that situation, I know that I can negate the damage, and even if he does decide to stone it, I'm still in good shape. So he taps for stone. He's got 2 cards in my hand now that I don't know about. Plays the second Niflheim and swings in for 700. That's where I negate all the damage. Draw into turn. I don't want to filter quite yet because I actually have that Servant of Refrain, or Familiar of Refrain. So I play it, nothing happens. And I don't want to filter because he can respond. I know he has stoning, so he can respond to the filter by stoning my Servant, and so I'll only get 1 counter. So I go ahead and try to bait out the stoning by playing Dark Faria, putting Paul in a position where he has the option to kill her, but I will be able to respond to it. So this is the trick with Familiar, is kind of forcing your opponent's actions before you use your Reflect effect to be able to make sure that the bonus goes through, and it works. He plays the stoning to death to kill Familiar, and I respond by filtering, which actually gets me a up to 5 counters before Familiar dies. And then at that point I still don't have a Regalia, so I flip again and I get lucky enough to hit my 4th Black Silence. So that's 4 turns where Ruler's Memoria could really punish me, but I get really lucky and get 4 stones off the top. So at this point I feel really comfortable because I know he only has 1 card in hand. Yes, he has the Death Sight, and yes, he has the Niflheim and stuff, but he doesn't want to get rid of the Niflheims at this point because that's the only thing that's making his Prowler able to really do work. So and he's got 1 extra card, so we don't know what that extra card is, but I know that he only has 1 card to my 3. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable. So he kills my Feasting, which is fine. I filter with Reflect. And I finally draw into Regalia, so I finally get Horn. And then off the top I hit the Ruler's Memoria, so that Horn came up at the absolute perfect time for me. So now I'm sitting at plenty enough. Well, Paul's pretty angry at that, but I just happened to get the Regalia right before I hit my Ruler's Memoria. So I swing it for 500 damage, so immediately tie the game back up, because whenever Dark Faria attacks, she gets I gain that much life for how much damage she's dealt, which is pretty helpful. So moving into Paul's turn here. Goes ahead and taps for another stone. He's got a Behemoth and a Necromancy in his grave. Or in his hand, sorry. He decides to play the Behemoth. So now I'm staring down that Behemoth, but the beauty of it not being able to attack this turn is that gives me time to respond. So he's going to attack into my Dark Faria. I'm going to flash into Feasting to negate the damage from the Prowler, but Dark Faria still technically did damage, so I gain 500 life, and then I have enough left over to stoning to death that Behemoth. So I know Paul only has 1 card in hand. I go ahead and pump up the Dark Faria here. Go up to 7 counters, and I flip over to be able to back myself up. And I go ahead and play Spiral of Despair to get rid of that last card in Paul's hand, which is a Necromancy. and then I deal 700 damage to Paul, putting me up to 47 and him down to 26. And leaving myself with 4 will up to be able to make some other plays, especially with Reflect being on Refrain side to be able to search for essentially anything in my deck. So at this point I feel like I'm re-established, even though I had a slow start with no orbs. I'm feeling pretty re-established, just in the fact that I don't really have to worry, you know, I can kind of respond to whatever Paul has to throw at me. So he does swing in with that Prowler, and I have my Flames of Outer World in hand to be able to kill it. And Paul at that point just has to pass the turn because he has no cards in hand, because the card that he drew into was a Death Scythe. So I'm going to go ahead and search for a card. I believe I searched for a second Dark Varia here to be able to maximize and put a lot of pressure and gain a lot more life. I flip back over to Reflect. Draw into turn. Pay 2 for the second Dark Varia. And I pump up Dark Varia I already have, so it's 900 damage, because when you have 2 Dark Varias on board, they pump each other up with their other shadows. So now I'm setting at 5600 to 2 Paul's 17. I flip over Reflect into Refrain, and I let Paul go. I have that Hera, which I could technically use and draw another card, but I just didn't. I guess I just chose not to. Paul decides to do Judgment. In response to Judgment, I cast the Flames of Outer World in response to his effect, I do Flames of the Outer World to kill him. I don't have Death Scythe up, so he still gets to keep his Imperishable, but now essentially I've mitigated Paul's hand because he decided to keep 1 card face down in the grave anyway. I have that Hera in hand, and at this point Paul is about to just scoop because he recognizes that I could just flip over or search for a Pumpkin Witch, give everything swiftness and flying, and just kind of swing in for the cave. It's definitely super lethal. So even without that, it's enough for lethal on board with feasting into double Farias. So there you have it, guys. Those are the lists. The list will be up on Saturday as always. Let me know what you thought about the match, what you would do differently, how the plays went, and go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, guys, this is TMO73 signing off.